This is Darren Marchant with American Nomad News. There's a lot of interesting subjects to talk about in interplanetary management. How do we begin to examine how to plan and manage the very complex matter of having lots of humans on Mars? How do we look at all of our options and pick the very best ones? Well, we have to start by developing an understanding of some of those options and the categories they fall in. So I'm going to do a little comparison. I've drawn some stuff in chalk on the ground because that's what I have to work with, is cardboard and markers and chalk and concrete. And I've chosen to do this in a place where I can cover it up with a doormat and not disturb the people who they own the concrete. The reason for that is I've had some people kind of mad at me for drawing on the concrete with chalk before, and I want to be as respectful and as possible and keep from making waves, as they say. So here we go. I'm going to show you first a quick glimpse of how I produced these graphics, and then we're going to get into the comparison of two different things. These two different things are different types of orbits. And we'll get into some details later about how those are achieved, but these are just two different types of orbits and some of the advantages and disadvantages and purposes for both. Here we go. Hopefully I didn't rotate that too quickly. As you can see, down over here I have a large tin, a small tin, and 3 different colors of chalk. Over here I have an example of the Holman transfer orbit, which is used is the basic go-to option for transferring humans to Mars. It's also been used for landers and so forth. Over here we have a cycler orbit. Now Buzz Aldrin was interested in this type of orbit, and we'll get into how this one's a little different and why people have chosen this one over that one for some good reasons. Okay, here we go. Now the Holman transfer orbit is popular for several reasons. Because you're not planning on spending a lot of time in space with any vehicle that goes directly from the orbit of Earth to the orbit of Mars. You want to keep that time in the space environment as short as possible. You want to get there quick, and that means a lot of fuel. And that means orbital corrections. That's when if you have an established orbit, then it's going to keep going in either an ellipse or a circle. Usually it's some level of elliptical quality to it. The Earth and Mars orbits are technically elliptical, but only by a little bit, and it's hard to see it in an accurate drawing of an ellipse. Now, an ellipse that is more exaggerated than the Earth or Mars orbit is easier to see. And I'll try and put a link in the description of the Holman transfer orbit, the cycler orbit, and what an ellipse means. Okay. So let's take a look at this one. Okay. Now, the first thing that happens is you get a rocket that comes off of Earth. Let's put make Earth a little dot there, right? Okay. And this is not to scale, is in no way accurate, it's just for ideas. Okay? Now, your spacecraft will first leave the Earth and establish an orbit close to the Earth in what we call low Earth orbit. At a certain point, it will turn on its propulsion systems, burn quite a lot of fuel, and establish something pretty close to what this white line will turn out to be. Somewhere in the middle, it'll make correction propulsions, which generally shouldn't be too much, but it kind of just makes that last part accurate. Now, the idea is that Earth is rotating and Mars is rotating at slightly different rates. And the trick is to get your spacecraft to leave Earth at such a moment and at such a speed and angle that the result is that it reaches the orbital distance of Mars at the moment when Mars happens to be in that point. It's like shooting a golf ball with a .22 from across the United States, from one side to the other. It's really a very impressive feat. And NASA and some other folks have managed to achieve this several times, and we've enjoyed quite a lot of data out of that. It's really an impressive feat. But that's basically how that works. Now, this uses a lot of fuel, but it's a lot less in a certain context. We may get into that later, but that's kind of how this works and what it's used for. Now let's take a look at the other one. Now this is the cycler orbit. The cycler orbit is not a one-off thing. The Holman transfer orbit is used when you plan to have one launch and one item delivered to Mars once. You launch it, you land it, you're done. Now the cycler orbit, imagine you live in some place like Seattle, and every day you have to go over to Bremerton. Bremerton's across the sound, across the water from Seattle. Well, the ferry system has been built so that you drive your car down the front of Seattle, you drive it onto the boat. The boat goes across the water, docks in Bremerton. And when they tell you to, you drive your car off and you're in Bremerton. The cycler orbit is really meant to basically be for something that would go around and around and around, constantly ferrying people and equipment to and from Mars. Now, how does that work? Okay. So, and I got another white. Oh, let's go over here. Okay. So the cycler orbit would have a semi-permanent vehicle. Okay. And that vehicle would have to be placed into that orbit and fueled up, and its speed, angle, direction, and so forth established so that it develops that cycler orbit. And then after that, it only has to do minor correction burns. It's kind of like the difference between making one object and having a factory. The unit cost is much less as long as you commit to lots and lots of units. And the unit here is a transfer. Okay? If you're only planning on having one transfer, this Holman orbit is efficient. because your ship is going to launch from Earth, land on Mars, and not go anywhere until it's time for it to launch off of Mars and come back. But if you plan to do that very many times, that's a lot of fuel per transfer. However, with this kind, conceivably, if you commit to lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of transfers, then your cost per transfer drops. And what I mean by cost is the amount of fuel and logistical effort for that transfer. I don't make economic advice because people can change the price of things. Just imagine they just decide that something costs more and talk people into it, and that's that crazy stuff we call money. I'm not talking about that. When I talk about cost, I mean how much metal, fuel, organization, people, activity does it take to do a thing. And those things are linked. Economic, financial economics and energy and materials economics are linked, but they're not entirely the same thing. So, Earth is going around and around and around like this. And if you time it right, okay, Earth is here at the moment when your ferry machine, your boat, your space boat, is there at the same time. Okay? And what happens is, by the time your ferry reaches the orbit of Mars, Mars is there too. Yippity-doo. That's cool. Okay. So, as you can imagine, in the long run, the cyclar orbit makes a lot of sense, assuming that you have this very large vehicle. So, these two orbits, if you can imagine, are something of Lego pieces or options, something like a letter in a word to spell out how you plan to do a thing. So the flow, and to get into, later we'll talk about flow charts and how that works. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to describe where they fit on the flow chart. And if you don't understand, I'll be coming out with a flow chart video soon. And if you see it in the list, go ahead and click it and take a look at what a flow chart is, and that'll help. Okay, so you'll see here, we'll put, how should I do this? Let's put 1, or many. It's a question mark. Okay? Okay, so 1 or many. You come down here and you go 1, that's for 1. Okay, 1 means Holman transfer. Many box around it, or a circle. Okay, if you're going to go the route of many, you want this one. So that's your flow chart right on top there. This is Darren Marchant with American Nomad News. Signing off.